This lesson is going to be on the staff. And for this lesson, you will need the worksheet called Fillable the Staff, which can be found on my MCPS classroom if you go to Files and then Notes and then Staff. I'll go ahead and share that with you so you know what it looks like while we're talking about it. It looks like this. It also says Lesson 1. So we'll go through this together. Music is written on a 5-line staff. It just looks like this. And they are numbered from the bottom to the top. So line 1 is the lowest line, and then line 5 is the highest line. They are numbered from lowest to highest, from the bottom to the top. Then between each of those lines, there is a space. And there are 4 spaces on a staff. And again, they're numbered 1 through 4 from the bottom to the top. The next section says musical sounds, low or high, are shown by the position of notes on the staff. Notes on the higher lines and or spaces are higher in pitch than those on the lower lines and or spaces. So pitch is a word that you've probably heard used before in music. Pitch just means the notes. It means how the notes sound. And another word for pitch is frequency, which is a word that you may have heard in a science class before. And frequency just means how fast or slow a string is vibrating. The string in this case is going to be your vocal folds vibrating against each other, vibrating in the air. So the pitch and the frequency are the same thing. So if the frequency is higher, if the string is vibrating faster, or if your vocal folds are vibrating faster, the pitch is going to sound higher. And then if the frequency is lower, the pitch is going to sound lower. So you can see on the page here that it's saying these notes, or this particular note, sounds higher than this note because it's higher up on the staff. And then this note, which is on a space, sounds lower than this note, which is also on a space. And it's because this one is lower on the staff. This next section is something that we would have done together during class. It said, draw a staff using the dots as your guide. Since we can't do that, I already drew the lines for you. What you are going to do, though, is in these blanks, you're going to answer question number 2 and number 3. So question number 2 says, on the staff above, number the lines from low to high. And that's going to be on the left side here. So just like we said at the top, they start on line number 1 at the bottom and they end with line number 5 at the top. So if we go back to number 2 here, I'm going to put a 1 in the bottom line, and then a 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that's the answer to number 2, how I just number my lines from low to high. So I'll give you a second to do that. Make sure if you weren't looking at my screen, if you were looking at your worksheet, that you come back and look at my screen so you can see what I entered, and then go back and look at your worksheet too. Then for question number 3, it says, on the staff above, number the spaces from low to high. So back up at the top of the worksheet, it said that we also number the spaces from the bottom to the top. So the lowest space is called space number 1. So if you look back at my worksheet, look back at this video or back at Zoom, this first space, we're going to number on the right-hand side of the page. That first space that's the lowest is going to be space number 1. Then above that, space number 2, then 3 and 4. So I'll give you a second to number those spaces on your worksheet as well. Then we're going to continue on to the next number on the worksheet, which is number 4. And I crossed out the arrow thing because unless you're using Kami, you're not going to be able to do that. It now says, by using the letter H for higher and L for lower, indicate whether the second note sounds higher or lower than the first note. And we're just doing that on these extra numbers in here that are 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So on number 1, I'm going to look at that second note here and make sure you're looking at the correct pitch, because this one is the second note. So you're going to look at those two notes and decide, okay, is the second note higher or lower? And if I look at that second note, you should notice that this space is lower than this space. The second note is on space number 1, and the first note is on space number 2. So if we're trying to decide whether the second note is higher or lower than the first note, the answer for this one is going to be L for lower. Then I'll go ahead and look at number 2, 3, 4, and 5. On number 2, again, we're going to be looking at the second note. So if I look at note number 2, that one's on space number 4. The first note is on line number 3. Since line number 3 is lower than space number 4, I'm going to put a H, or sorry, since we're looking at the second note. Space number 4 is higher than line number 3. So that second note is higher than the first note. So I'll put an H. Then if you look at number 3, the second note is on line number 5, and the first note is on line number 4. So that means the second note is on a higher line than the first note, which means it's going to sound higher. So I'm going to put an H. Then if we move on to number 4, the second note is on space number 1, and the first note is on space number 3. So the second note is on a lower space than the first note, which means the second note is going to sound lower than the first note. So we're going to put an L for number 4. And the last one here is going to be number 5. The second note is on line number 3, and the first note is on space number 2. So the second note looks like it's higher on the staff than the first note, which means it's also going to sound higher than the first note. So we're going to put an H for number 5. Then we'll move on to the next question, which is a different number 5, which is kind of confusing. It says, by using the letter H for high and L for low, indicate whether the first note of each of the following sets sounds higher or lower in pitch than the second note. So this is backwards of what we just did. And now we're saying, is the first note higher or lower? So they did the first one here for you. You can see the first note was on space number 1, and the second note was on space number 2. So that means the first note would be lower, so L, than the second note. Then if we look at number 6, the first note is on space number 4, and the second note is on line number 4. You can see by looking at them, though, that the note on space number 4 looks higher than the note on line number 4, which means it's also going to sound higher than the second note. So we're going to put an H for number 6. Then if we move on to number 7, we'll see that the first note is on space number 2, and the second note is on space number 4. That means the first note is going to sound lower than the second note. So we're going to put an L for number 7. Then if you move on to number 8, you're going to see that the first note is on line number 4, and the second note is on space number 1. That means if you're looking at it, the first note looks like it's higher than the second note, and so it's also going to sound higher than the second note. So we're going to put an H for number 8. On number 9, you can see that the first note is on line number 4, and the second note is on line number 5. So the first note is going to look and sound lower than the second note. So we're going to put an L for number 9. Then the last one is number 10. You can see that the first note is on line number 2, and the second note is on line number 1. That means the first note is going to sound higher than the second note. So we're going to put an H for number 10. Now, remember, if you are on a Mac of some kind, Once you are done here, what you're going to do is go up to the top of the page and you're going to change the name to say your name, the staff.pdf. You can click enter after that so that it'll save what you just did. It'll save it as a new title. If you are not on a Mac, what you're going to do is look for the download button in the top right hand corner of the screen, which will look like this. And after you click the download button, it's going to come up at the bottom of the screen. It's going to say new, which we're not going to click. And then it's going to say fillable the staff.pdf. What we want to do is change the part that says fillable to say your name. So it should say your name, the staff.pdf. And then next to that, there's going to be a save button. So after you've changed the name, you're going to click save. Then after that, you should be able to upload it to your course Google Drive folder, and then you're done.